Good day everyone. So this is my report in Module 7. Mediate inference. It is a process of reasoning in which from one proposition with the aid of another proposition called medium, the mind infers not only a new proposition but also a new truth. The new truth achieved in mediate inference, however, must be distinct from the previous asserted ones, but must necessarily follow from them. Mediate inference clearly requires three propositions. So, in mediate inference, it means that it is the process of the mind in which, from the agreement or disagreement of two ideas with a third idea, we infer the agreement or disagreement with each other. So, mediate inference is popularly known as syllogism. So, para mas maintindihan natin kung ano yung mediate inference, so we're going to compare it in immediate inference. So when we say in immediate reference, the mind reasons out by passing directly from one proposition to a new proposition. So proposition with the help of a medium. Thus, whereas in immediate inference, the mind draws a conclusion immediately without resource to a medium. In immediate inference, the mind draws a conclusion through a medium. Second, in immediate inference, only two terms are necessary, namely the subject term and predicate term. Then in mediate inference naman, three terms are required, which is the subject term, predicate term, and the middle term. And finally, because in immediate inference, only two terms are utilized, the subject and predicate terms, no new truth is established or achieved. But in mediate inference, a new truth is attained as the mind draws a conclusion by comparing the truth of two propositions with the aid of a medium or a middle term. Syllogism. Syllogism is an argument consisting of three propositions which are so related that when the first two propositions are posited as true, the third proposition must also be true. The first two propositions of syllogism are called premises. One is called the major premise if it contains the major term, and the other is called the minor premise if it contains the minor term. The third proposition, whose meaning and truth is implied in the premises, is called the conclusion. So, syllogism is also that which expresses the relationship of a minor term to the major term, whether they are in agreement or disagreement with each other. It uses three terms, namely the major term, middle term, and minor term. The meanings and functions of this term will be discussed under simple categorical syllogism. So, pagdating natin sa simple categorical syllogism, malalaman natin kung ano ba yung major term, middle term, and minor term na tinutukoy dito sa syllogism. Simple categorical syllogism uses three propositions and three terms. Its first premise usually appears as the major premise, while the minor premise appears as the second premise. Although this is not an absolute rule in logic, sometimes the second premise is the major one while the first premise is the minor premise. This example should make familiar the locations of the premises. So, all men are mortal, which is our major premise. All Filipinos are men, our minor premise. And all Filipinos are mortal, which is our conclusion. So, in a categorical syllogism, it is like in an argument, the two terms are compared with the third term in the antecedent, and the conclusion states that the two terms agree or do not agree with each other. And on simple words, it is an argument with two premises and a conclusion. So for example is this: all men are mortal, all Filipinos are men, all Filipinos are mortal. So, the proposition all Filipino are mortal is the conclusion. The subject term of the conclusion is the Filipino, which is what we call the minor term. And the premise that contains term is called the minor premise. The predicate term mortal is the major term, which is the premise that contains it is called major premise. So, the term repeated in both premises but not found in the conclusion is known as middle term. So, ano nga ba yung term na makikita natin, matatagpuan natin sa major and minor premises natin? So, di ba yung men. So, ibig sabihin, yun yung middle term natin. While the Filipinos is our minor term. Kasi, so, di ba sinabi ko kanina yung about sa major, and minor premises and conclusion natin. So, di ba sa example na yan, kung titingnan natin, we will find the conclusion. So, ang conclusion natin, di ba dito, is all Filipinos are mortal. Then, we're going to look for the predicate. So, di ba kapag sinabi nating predicate, it tells or states something about the subject. So, ibig sabihin, ang predicate natin dyan is mortal. And then, ang subject natin is Filipinos. So in major term naman, so pag sinabi nating major term, so ito yung predicate na makikita natin sa conclusion, na makikita naman natin sa major premise natin. Then, ang minor term naman is, ito yung subject na makikita din natin in our conclusion. And, makikita din natin in our minor premise. And the middle term naman is makikita natin siya sa two premises, which is major and minor. Pero hindi natin siya makikita sa conclusion natin. So, this is the example para mas maintindihan natin kung ano ba yung major, minor, and conclusion na yan, or yung mga term. So, let's proceed in the principles of categorical syllogism. The first principle is the principle of identity. Everything is what it is, or expressed in its negative form, that which is not cannot be not what it is. Whether in its affirmative or negative form, the meaning of this principle is the same. Things are what they are in themselves. For example, circles, squares, carabaos, horses, stars, and the moon will continue to be what they are even when nobody thinks of them. Regardless of whether anybody thinks of it or not, they will continue to be what they are because their existence is independent of man's thinking. So this principle is true of things as they are in themselves and independently of their being thought of. Next is the principle 2, which is the principle of contradiction. A thing cannot be and not be in the same respect. This principle can be stated alternatively as if a thing is, it cannot be not is. The principle simply states that the limitation of anything so that if a thing is, it cannot be. Then in the principle 2, the principle of contradiction, a thing cannot be and not be in the same respect. So in this principle, when one is dead, he or she cannot be alive at the same one. Circle cannot be a square or a triangle at the same time. Carabao cannot also be a dog at the same time. So in this principle is purely logical principle because it is not applicable to things as they are in themselves, but only to things insofar as they are known or mentally reproduced. Then principle 3, the principle of the identifying third. Two things that are identical with the same third thing are identical with one another. So for the principle 3, so this is example. All terrorists are mortal. All terrorists are animals. Some animals are mortal. So in the cited example, the term terrorist is the identifying third or medium. The reason is plain and simple. The one animals and the term mortal are identified. For the fourth principle, the principle of the separating third. Two things of which the one is identical with the same third thing, but the other of which are not identical with one another. In the principle 4, so for example, all angels are spiritual beings. No corrupt government officials are angels. No corrupt government officials are spiritual beings. So in the cited example, the term angels is the separating third because through this term, the terms corrupt government officials and spiritual beings are distinguished or separated. So let's proceed in the rules of categorical syllogism. So for the rule number 1, there must be only 3 terms in the syllogism, which are the minor term, the major term, and the middle term. For the rule number 2, neither the major nor the minor term may be distributed in the conclusion if it is undistributed in the premises. So, like major term must not become universal in the conclusion if it is only particular in the major premise, and minor term must not become universal in the conclusion if it is only particular in the minor premise. For the rule number 3, the middle term must not appear in the conclusion. Like for example, all tables have 4 legs. All dogs have 4 legs. Therefore, all dogs and tables have 4 legs. And then in rule number 5, the middle term must not be distributed at least once in the premises. Middle term must be used at least once as universal in any of the premises. It must be shown in the premises that at least all members or referents of the middle term are identical or not identical with all the members or referents of either the minor or the major term. For the rule number 5, only an affirmative conclusion can be drawn from affirmative premises. The major term and minor term of both affirmative premises agree with the middle term. Hence, the conclusion must express agreement between the major term and minor term. So for example, every carnivore is a meat eater, which is affirmative. Then a lion is a carnivore, which is affirmative. Therefore, a lion is a meater. So since the two premises are affirmative, so therefore the conclusion must also affirmative. Then in rule number 6, no conclusion can be drawn from two negative premises. If both the premises are negative, major term and the minor term disagree with the middle term, then the middle term cannot establish any relation between the major term and the minor term. In the rule number 7, if one premise is particular, the conclusion must be particular. If the one premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. Only a portion of either the minor term or major term reference shares something in common with the middle term. So example, all Spartans are Greek. Some warriors are Spartans. Therefore, some warriors are Greek. In rule number 8, no conclusion can be drawn from two particular premises. There are three possibilities. Like either both are affirmative or both are negative, and one is affirmative and the other is negative. So let's proceed with figures and modes of categorical syllogism. So this refers to the logical form of syllogism from the standpoint of the arrangement of the terms major term, minor term, and middle term, and the arrangement of the propositions major remes and minor remes, according to quantity, universal and particular, and quality, affirmative and negative. For the first one is figure of a categorical syllogism. So in this is why syllogistic figure is defined as the proper arrangement of the middle term in relation to the major and minor term in the premises. Although syllogistic figure can be generally understood as that which refers to the arrangement of the terms and premises. So the modes. Next, modes of categorical syllogism. So the modes of the categorical syllogism consist of the disposition of the premises according to quality and the quantity. Then number 3 is the rule of the valid modes of each figure. In this topic, the rules of categorical syllogism shall be applied in order to determine the valid modes of each figure. And lastly, revise traditional memory aid for modes of each figure. That's all. Thank you.